It was the best part of 3, almost 4 months ago, since the final report was handed down by the Royal Commission into the causes and the systems around members of the Australian Defence Force, both currently serving and former serving, and the shocking numbers that have taken their own lives. Now, on this show, we've talked about it for years. We have literally sat down with the mothers. We have called for and championed the Royal Commission. We've followed every single part of this, so today was a very big day. Today was the official response of the government to the more than 120 recommendations that Nick Caldis, the former Deputy Commissioner of Police in New South Wales, made in a very lengthy, very detailed and very honest account of a system that Australians see as a national shame, something that must and had to change. Now, the Prime Minister spoke back in September about his response when the report was first handed to the government.
And this is where the government will thoroughly consider every recommendation. We want to work across the parliament on these issues and do what we can to ensure that just as our veterans and defence personnel step up for our country, we have an obligation to step up for them.
So the formal response to the report, which was released in September, has now been released. If you brush across much of the media coverage, it will say that the government has accepted most of, if not all, of the recommendations that we've talked about in the past that make common sense suggestions, such as making sure that families don't have to move around too much, making sure that the emotional intelligence of people is considered before they are promoted, that constant surveys should be done of the membership of the Defence Force about the leadership in the Defence Force, and if there's a gulf between where the men and women of the ADF are and their leaders, well, then the leaders should change. There's also a whole series of recommendations in and around brain trauma, the keeping of data so that we actually have an honest account of the number of people that have taken their own lives, and some pretty confronting stuff about the Department of Veterans Affairs. But as always, the devil is in the detail. The reason that I said last night in great detail, but because it's a weekend you may have missed it, you need to watch this show every single night until the Christmas break. Because the assumption of the government is that people are now starting to not pay attention, meaning that the news stories which came out of today, because most people didn't read the original report, most people didn't read how many of the recommendations were put forward, and most people have not followed through on the detail of how many of the recommendations are going to lead to changes versus just nodding in the direction of the report. You've got to watch us. Now, they hope that you're going to be distracted by whatever Big Bash game is on, or cricket that I think starts up again later in the week at the tests. But do me a favour, please come back to this show, 9 o'clock Australian Eastern Daylight Time, every night during summer. Please, series link us on Foxtel, add us to the favourites if you're watching on Binge or on Flash. If you're watching through the Sky News app, favourite this program, get the podcast at skynews.com.au. Stay in touch, because I'll keep an eye on all of it, so you don't have to, and you can get on with the preparations for that beautiful time of year that we are in right now, of parties, presents and time with family and friends. A perfect example of that is that this announcement happened today. Now, Parliament, of course, was around for the last 2 weeks. If anything was truly urgent and the government was able to get a vote through the Parliament, they would have been able to do so in the last 2 weeks. But instead, there's no guarantee that the Parliament will resume before the next election, meaning that if anything requires legislation or a vote in the Parliament, that will not happen until potentially after the next federal election, one where this government could lose its majority and left-wing people like the Greens, or particularly the Victorian Teals, might be the ones that are actually going to prop up that government in a minority situation. There, of course, could be a completely different minority government, but we'll know why that is the lesser of two most likely outcomes going into the election. No, we had to wait till today, to the official first working day after the start of summer and the beginning of the wind-down period for most people when it comes to political news. Because guess what? They are not implementing everything that is in this report. In fact, I can break this down for you nice and easy. There's 122 recommendations which Nick Caldis and the Commission made. The government has agreed to 85 of them. Yes, that is a majority. But they've also found ways to say they agree with the report but they don't promise to do anything in the report, such as agrees in principle with 19 of the suggestions. There's a step down from this where they just note what's in the report 17 times. Now, frankly, agreed in principle and noted feel like the too hard basket of the response to this. One, which was a change to some of the pension schemes, has been just outright rejected. For what reason? Of course, we didn't get into that today. In fairness to the Prime Minister, who, yes, I'm a hard marker on, and I hope his time in office is as short as possible, and to his Deputy and Defence Minister, this is what they said today, when most people were just stenographers for what they were saying about the report rather than actually looking at the details of the report or what they are putting in the too hard basket in the recommendations.
My government will establish a new Defence and Veterans Services Commission to undertake the most comprehensive reform to the culture, systems and processes across Defence, the ADF and the Department of Veterans Affairs to prevent suicide and improve the mental health and well-being of service personnel and veterans.
At the heart of the Royal Commission's report and the government's response to it is that Defence's greatest asset is its people, and we need to look after them.
So again, let's go back, all right? If you hear, read or anything anywhere, oh, most of it they're going to put in place. Yes, okay, 85 of 122, they are going to promise to act on, meaning it will change. The too hard basket has 19 of the agreed in principles and 17 of the government has noted. So let's have a look in the too hard basket. Which of these do you think should be acted upon versus just agreed to in principle or noted? Here's some that stood out for me. Recommendation 61 is that they should establish a brain injury program. Why? Because people who significantly are affected by concussion while serving for the country may well later in life end up developing the same type of diseases which we know can lead to an awful lot of noise, mental health issues, and yes, some people choosing to end their own life. That is simply just agreed in principle, no promise to act. Recommendation 78, to prevent, minimise and treat moral injury. Again, recognise but no plan to act. Recommendation 80, the DVA to take responsibility for supporting members' transition out of the ADF. Now, the DVA is a complicated, difficult organisation, one that I believe should be completely scrapped and start again. While they do well for many people of previous wars, they do pretty poorly for more modern people that have people whose service is a little closer to today than decades ago. And people, as they transition out of the ADF into quote-unquote normal society, this is where people are falling out of the system. When they fall out of the system, they get themselves in a world of trouble, and some of those people. How has that not been agreed to by the government? How is it just agreed in principle? Again, this is the too hard basket that I'm reading from here. 81, the DVA to fund a program to support members' well-being during the transition to civilian life. Oh yeah, they recognise it, they agree in principle, but no plan to actually make that happen. Recommendation 83C, to fill the gap between defence and civilian training. This is huge. Again, I wouldn't be agreeing in principle, I would be agreeing and promising to do. Recommendation 87, to establish a new agency to focus on veteran wellbeing. Well, they say there's going to be a new agency, but it's not going to be focused on veteran wellbeing. It's going to be focused on some of the implementation of the 85 of the 122 things that are not in the too hard basket. While clearly the best part of almost 40 sit currently in that too hard basket. Recommendation 90B, to expand mental health support to all reserve personnel. It's agreed in principle, but no promise for action. These are the reasons why the Royal Commission was called in the first place. These are examples of dozens and then hundreds and then thousands of people who end up not having the support that they deserve after serving our country. I know there's a lot of detail here, but I know you can handle it, and I want to follow the bouncing ball out of respect for the people who serve our country. Again, Recommendation number 98 is in the agreed in principle, the too hard basket, to strengthen the DVA performance targets. Why wouldn't that be agreed to? Recommendation 100 to improve the transparency, accountability and effectiveness of the Department of Veterans Affairs. That would get a triple tick from me, but for some reason it is just agreed in principle, no plan for action when it comes to this Prime Minister and this Defence Minister. And 106, establish a suicide database for serving and ex-serving members. Why is that anywhere other than absolutely agreed to, underline in red ink, one of the first things that they could take place, so we know how many people are taking their own lives who have served this country, even for a day. I find this outrageous in particular, but no giant surprise. Now again, I understand how big, I understand how complicated, I understand how costly, but let's be very clear. The men and women who defend this country, who at a moment's notice could be sent to the other side of the world or have to deal with something in this country, are, like the members of our emergency services, be they volunteer or professional, are the best of us. These are people who run towards trouble when the rest of us are running the other way. These are the people who are willing to defend every right we have in this country. Yet the government and the political leadership of this government that talk the talk are not going to walk the walk. Even worse than the agreed to in principle is just noted. If there is any doubt whatsoever, this is the official list of the too hard basket. Of those, there are the best part of 19 of those that have now made it into the noted, 17 that have made it into the noted basket. Here's just some, I won't read them all, but I'm fixated on the detail because the detail is what matters, and what matters is everything to make sure the men and women who defend this country do not take their own life. Recommendation 1 of the Royal Commission has been just put in as noted. The number 1 recommendation of the Royal Commission is being ignored: to improve the capacity of future Royal Commissions to undertake their inquiries. Noted. Recommendation 42, to ensure that future Inspector Generals of the ADF have not served in the ADF, i.e. an outsider can come in to see what the problems are and they are not affected by the culture of the ADF or the slippery pole that many people in the public service parts of the ADF climb like politicians. Noted. Recommendation 88, to develop a national funding agreement for veterans' wellbeing. It's not even agreed in principle, it's not agreed to, it's just noted. Recommendation 101A, to enable veterans to choose their rehabilitation provider and to self-manage their budget for approved household assistance in an opt-in basis. Put simply, if you want an NDIS-style system for you and your rehabilitation, that should be made available to you. It is just noted by this government. It won't happen. Recommendation 111, to achieve gold standard rating for defence data sets related to suicidality, people who may commit suicide or people who do. It's just noted. 113, to ensure commanding officers access and use quality data for continuous improvement of wellbeing metrics. Noted. A couple more. 118A, to continue the existing census question for the ADF service in the next and future censuses. Why is this not agreed to? Why is this just noted? Why is this your service, and whether you have and when you did and for how long, in the too hard basket? Recommendation 120, to increase funding and research into veteran health and wellbeing. How is this not agreed to? Let alone agreed in principle, it's just noted. And finally, enable research into the health and wellbeing of defence families. Noted. They talk a big game when the Royal Commission is called. They say they can't possibly have an opinion because the Royal Commission is playing itself out. They wait from September to December to respond to the Royal Commission, of which of 122, 85 they say yes, 19 they say kinda, and 17 they say noted. 1 they say no, they're not going to do, presumably because it costs too much money. The Shadow Defence Minister is Andrew Hastie. He is a hope of the side. He is a man who you would hope would implement all of these recommendations. I hope he gets the chance to do so sooner rather than later, but we'll have to wait for an election for that to happen.
I think it comes down to political leadership, and it's up to the Albanese government to demonstrate they can lead. So far, I think they've failed to lead the Defence Force well. We do want to work with the government on a bipartisan basis to deliver for our defence and veteran community.
Now, I guarantee in a couple of days' time, what seems like universal praise for the government's response is going to start to fracture, or at least we're starting to see, or we will start to see what I think is the gradients of response. The things that are in the too hard basket or the to-do list or somewhere in between. As the days roll on, I'll pay attention to the response, I'll pay attention to the advocacy groups, I'll pay attention to the mums who called for this Royal Commission. I'll report back to you on how they feel, and I've got a feeling eventually it's going to be the way that I feel, and hopefully you do tonight, about a government that, yes, has taken on the majority. Good. But too many things are too vague in an area that must improve. I believe the Royal Commission did fabulous work. I believe most, if not all, of its recommendations should be in place.